Hey guys, Trip here, and I've been playing Watch Dogs 2. I thought the first game was pretty average, but I've quickly fallen in love with this one. If you've been following the podcast, you know that I have some pretty strong opinions on Ubisoft as a company, but I have to give them credit where it's due. Watch Dogs 2 is a major step forward for both the series and Ubisoft as a whole. The story has a fun-loving tone that fits the setting and subject matter, the atmosphere is dense and painstakingly detailed, and the characters are surprisingly likable and rise above their archetypes as the story goes on. But perhaps most important are the tweaks made to the infamous Ubisoft formula to make the open world more fun and engaging. Watch Dogs 2 is not a simple carbon copy of every other Ubisoft open world game. The core gameplay is refined, streamlined, and efficient, focusing more on pre-made, carefully crafted scenarios and less on repetitive procedural content. From the moment I picked this game up, I actually had trouble putting it down. But after I beat the game, I couldn't help but notice something was missing. Something I've come to expect from open world games. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but as time goes on, I'm starting to think Watch Dogs 2 strayed from the Ubisoft formula a bit too much. This episode, perhaps more than any other, is going to live up to the name of this show. I love Watch Dogs 2, and I think Ubisoft is going in the right direction, but there's always room for improvement. So, did Watch Dogs 2 stray too far from the open world formula? Can we have limitless playability without sacrificing quality? Or are we trying to have our cake and eat it too? Well, let's take a look. Before we discuss the ways in which Watch Dogs 2 strayed from the formula, we need to discuss what that formula is. The Ubisoft formula is a pejorative term to describe the predictable nature of Ubisoft's open world games. There's a number of mechanics that remain consistent across games, be it Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, or the original Watch Dogs. But put simply, Ubisoft games in the past have relied more on the player experimenting with the gameplay than diverse level design and compelling story. There's often a sea of collectibles scattered across the world, constant random encounters, and a seemingly inexhaustible series of objectives. The goal here is to give the player the sense that the world is alive, and to make sure they never run out of things to do. But this has led to a slew of games that lack originality, where you often find yourself doing the same few activities for hours on end without an interesting story to keep you engaged. So you may be wondering why I would miss any aspect of the Ubisoft formula to begin with. Well, after playing Watch Dogs 2 and going back to some older Ubisoft games, I've realized it's not the formula I hate, but the lack of anything on top of it. I feel the same way about the Ubisoft formula as I do about the Radiant quests in Skyrim. In both cases, the developers relied on these mechanics in lieu of diverse, compelling gameplay. I love random encounters, I love emergent gameplay, I love mini-games and distractions, but you can't base a game on those features alone. It's like having icing without the cake. Call me an idealist, but I think we can have the best of both worlds. A game with a solid series of preset, finite activities and an added bonus of procedural content and distractions. Watch Dogs 2 has a ton of content. There are side quests full of interesting stories and gameplay, collectibles that actually reward the player for finding them, and all sorts of car, bike, and even sailing races. Between this, the main story, and a satisfying gameplay loop, Watch Dogs 2 can keep you occupied for quite a while. The problem here is that the core gameplay loop is completely reliant on the story and preset scenarios. Once you're done with them, you're pretty much done with the game. In previous Ubisoft games, you could keep finding things to do for months. Now, the things you were doing were rarely engaging and stopped being fun after a while, but I think we can have our cake and eat it too. Take a non-Ubisoft game like Red Dead Redemption. Along with a solid series of quests, side quests, and collectibles, the game is chock full of content to keep you occupied for a while. There's an endless supply of randomly generated encounters and procedurally generated bounty hunting missions. And since the core gameplay loop is solid, the game can keep you occupied for months on end. I respect Watch Dogs 2's decision to move away from repetitive, procedurally generated content in favor of a more focused experience, but I don't think these design choices are mutually exclusive. The original Watch Dogs, for all its faults, had some interesting random encounters. You could stop robberies in progress, take out criminals, and generally live out your own vigilante fantasy. There are still elements of this in the sequel, but they're not enough to keep you occupied for long. I would have liked to see Watch Dogs 2 expand upon these procedural activities, making them more hacking and stealth oriented, and generally giving the player more to do in between missions. What if the eavesdropping and hacking of pedestrians was more involved? What if someone's profile information could generate a random mission for you? What if you could discover a corrupt CEO on the street, travel to his randomly generated mansion, and use your hacking skills to steal his money and rewire it to the people he's ripping off? What if you could eavesdrop on a gang member discussing an upcoming shootout or robbery and actually interact with it for good or ill? What if there were just enough of these unique, repeatable scenarios that they stayed fresh without getting old too quickly? If Watch Dogs 2 had more random and procedural missions on top of what we already got, I'd be playing this game for years to come. But it's not just the lack of emergent gameplay that shortens the lifespan of an open world game. Whether you notice it or not, minigames and other distractions can have a real impact on a game's longevity. I mentioned this earlier, but I love minigames. I never really focus on them, but there's a certain comfort in knowing they're there. I can always take a break from my main quest and immerse myself in the world, playing silly board games, getting drunk at a bar, or engaging in any number of distractions that flesh out the world and give the player a variety of things to do. The original Watch Dogs had your standard chess games, drinking games, and racing activities, as well as a jarring, anachronistic, yet surprisingly creative set of virtual reality games and digital trips. But aside from the racing activities I mentioned earlier, there are absolutely no minigames of any kind in Watch Dogs 2. Like I said, minigames are one of those things you don't really miss until they're gone, and I'll always choose a solid set of primary activities over a handful of meaningless distractions, but I do have to wonder why the minigames from the first game weren't at least carried over to the sequel. Well, that takes me back to my original point. Ubisoft was so committed to dropping the formula that they missed an opportunity to diversify the gameplay. I would have loved to see more hacking tournaments like we experienced briefly in the main story, different styles of hacking puzzles on top of what we got. What if you could play arcade games at the bar and cheat your way to the top with your hacking skills? It could even be a game within a game where you're trying to cheat without your opponent noticing. In a game about technology and hacking, the lack of minigames and distractions is a real missed opportunity. Ubisoft doesn't seem to understand why many of us ridiculed their design choices in the past, and I hope they approach future games with a more open mind. So why did I decide to talk about this? Well, I say this in almost every episode now, but I love open world sandbox games. Creating a great one is a delicate balancing act. There's a million ways to get them wrong and only a few ways to get them right. Finding that balance between diversity, quantity, quality, and longevity is a difficult task, but it can and has been done. When a sandbox hooks you in, there's nothing else like it. Suddenly, you're living a life in a virtual world, a world that feels alive, full of things to experience. We should always applaud a game for innovating, for evolving in a positive way to create a better experience, but I think it's up to us as gamers to challenge developers. I want my cake, and I want to eat it too. I loved Watch Dogs 2, and hopefully Ubisoft will expand upon what they learned from this game, without sacrificing the little things that make open worlds so great. But hey, that's just my opinion. Hey guys, Trip here. If you liked that video, why not watch some more? Hit that like button and make sure to share this video on Reddit and social media. If you want to see more Psychotrip, check out my Patreon. There you'll find all of my videos, as well as articles I've written for Comicsverse. If you like what you see, think about donating $1 or $2. Turns out hacking into an ATM is not as easy as it looks. I need bail money. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.